Agutevach, this is Gemara Nazir Daf Chaf, and we pick it up on the bottom of Yodetes Amid Beis. Baruch Hashem, another exciting day in the world of Daf Yomi, as we're going to be finishing the third perek of Meseches Nazir. So says the Gemara on the bottom of Yodetes Amid Beis, Katani Reisha, the beginning, the Reisha of the Mishnah taught us, Beishamai Aimrim, Nazir Shleishim Yom, Ubeisil Aimrim, Nazir B'tchila. We had a machlokes in the beginning of the Mishnah in a case of someone who says Nazirus Harbe outside of Eretz Yisrael, and then he subsequently comes, and he finished his Nazirs, then he comes into Eretz Yisrael. So we had a machlokes, how long of a Nazirus does he have to keep now that he's entered into Eretz Yisrael? Beis Shammai says your classical Stam Nazir 30 days in Eretz Yisrael. Beis Hillel says no. Nazir b'tchila, as long as the original Nazirus was, that's how long it has to be right now. So suggests the Gemara, Lema b'hakamifki. Let us say that what is at the root, what is Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? What are they really arguing about? Suggests the Gemara, let's say it's the following machlokes. The Beis Shammai savri eretz amrim mishum gusha. Now we're going to get involved in the level of Toma that exists outside of Eretz Yisrael. So suggests the Gemara, you know why Beis Shammai holds you need to have an Nazirs of 30 days? Because Beis Shammai is of the opinion that Eretz Amim, the land outside of Eretz Yisrael, is Tamim Mishum Gusha, which means it's a Toma not because of the Avir, because of the airspace. As the bottom Rashi, Rivan explains, V'lo Mishum Avira, it's not because of the air. It's a weaker toma. Therefore, Gazur Alei, it was a weakened form of toma that it was decreed upon Chutz La'aretz. Says Beis Shammai, and therefore, what is necessary in the event that one kept the Nazirus in such a scenario, but now what happens is subsequently he returns or he goes to Eretz Yisrael. What does he have to do right now? It says Beis Shammai 30 days. So the Gemara suggests that this is because why? This is because of the fact that Chutz La'aretz only has a tuma of a gusha, not of the avira of the airspace. Beis Hillel Savri, as we turn over to today's daf Chaf Amud Aleph, Beis Hillel holds Misham Avira Gazur Alei. Beis Hillel holds that no, the airspace is the level of Tama. As the top Rashi Rivana explains, V'chamira Tomasa. It's a more stringent form of Tama outside of Eretz Yisrael. And that's the reason why Beis Hillel holds the Tavi Kivitzchila. Meaning, the Gemara is suggesting that perhaps the level of Nazirus that is necessary after a person enters Eretz Yisrael, after he kept his Nazirus in Chutz La'aretz, perhaps has to do with the level of Toma that exists outside of Eretz Yisrael. That Beis Shammai holds outside Eretz Yisrael, it's not so bad. Only the land is tummy, but not the air. And therefore, based on such a suggestion, how much of a new Nazirus would be necessary now when he goes to Eretz Yisrael? 30 days. Beis Hillel says no, even the air here in Chutz La'aretz is tamei. And therefore, what level of Nazirus is going to be needed of the whole thing? And basically, to explain on a very simplistic level, is that if even the airspace is tamei, says Beis Hillel, that which you kept your Nazirus in Chutz La'aretz is almost nothing. So now, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, you have to redo it. But if it's only the land, then there is some level of kiyum to the Nazirus that you kept. And therefore, what are you going to need right now? You're going to need only 30 days, says Beis Shammai. Says the Gemara, Chafam Aleph Loi, that's not the machlokes. The Kuli Alma, everyone agrees, Mishum Gusha Gazur Alei. Really, even Beis Hillel agrees that it's not a Tumah D'Rabbanan, it's a Tumah on the land itself. So why does Beis Shammai hold that you need to have 30 days? And why does Beis Hillel hold you need to redo the whole thing? Beis Shammai Savri B'stam Nazirus Kanisna Ubeis Hillel Savri Ki Kanisna B'tchilas Nazirus. They're arguing on what level of kinas was imposed on such a person. Beis Shammai says that if one becomes a Nazir outside of Eretz Yisrael, we canas him with a stam Naziros 30 days. Beis Hillel says no, we canas him, they has to redo the whole thing. We continue 4 lines down with the story that the Mishnah quoted with Hilni Amalka, in which she accepted Nazirs of 7 years. She became Tameh, she had another 7 years, then she entered Eretz Yisrael, and seemingly she had another 7 years. And Beis Hillel seemed to disagree and said, no, it's going to be only, and we're not sure. I shouldn't say Beis Hillel disagreed. The question in the Mishnah was how much of a Naziros did Hilni have to keep after she went back into Eretz Yisrael? So that is the Shaila of our Gemara, 5 lines down, Chaf Amud Aleph. Ibaylo b'shenit meis, asks the Gemara, va'aliba de Beis Shammai, is the story in the Mishnah that Hilni Amalka, that what happened? She became Tamei, and therefore how much more did she have to do now? Only 30 days. Oidelma b'shaloynit meis, va'aliba de Beis Hillel. And we're going with Beis Hillel. That Beis Hillel says when you enter the Eretz Yisrael, you got to redo your whole Naziros. That's why it's an extra 7 years for 21 years. So if anyone's bothered by the way the Mishnah said over the case, don't be concerned, as that's going to be the Gemara right now. Let's see. Says the Gemara, Tashma, I'll bring you a raya. Also Eretz. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah itself said she went up to Eretz Yisrael. Vaharu Beis Hillel, and Beis Hillel paskind that she has to be a Nazir for how long? 7 more years. So says the Gemara, I don't understand what your shaila is. You're suggesting that maybe the case she became Tamei and we're going with Beis Shammai, if that's the case. Rav Yehuda Omer lo yiseh Nazira el yudal shana. So the Mishnah continued. And the Mishnah said that according to Rav Yehuda, she was only in Nazir for 14 years. Yudal shana v'shloishim yaimi ba'ilei. Says the Gemara, if you're going within a Beis Shammai that you became Tamei, you need an extra 30 years. There's no suggestion of it being only 14 years. The only other suggestion might be it's 14 years and 30 days. So the case the Mishnah teaches us that what are we talking about? We're talking about Beis Hillel, that there's going to be a kanas of the full term of originally, which is another 7 years. Tana bi'achi, the Gemara brings a raya to this. Rav Yehuda Omer Mishur Rav Eliezer Damar Kra Zois Toiras Hanazir Atayra Amar Kinitma B'Yom Aleos. What happens? 10 Loi Toiras Nazir. If someone becomes Tamei on the day of the completion of the Naziros, what is the halacha? You have to give an entirely new Naziros of that term, and that's why Hilni already observed 14 years, but had to observe another 7. We continue with the Mishnah on the bottom of Chaf Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah, we have 2 groups of Eidim testifying how long of a Naziros did someone accept upon himself. One group says this guy, he accepted 2 terms of Naziros. And the other Eidim testify. So we have a clash in their testimony. How long of Naziros did this person accept? Was it 2 or 5 terms of Naziros? Beis Shammai Oimrim Nachliku Eidus V'Inka Naziros. Says Beis Shammai, classical Eidim blow up. They're clashing. We don't have any proof, and therefore there's no Naziros. And if anyone's wondering, what is the person himself saying? He's denying it. He's saying, I didn't say anything. So now, if the 2 and the 5 blow up, there's nothing left. The person doesn't have to become a Nazir. Beis Hillel Oimrim, no. Yesh bechlal chamesh shtayim. Included in 5, says Beis Hillel, is obviously 2. And therefore, she'in Nazir shtayim. And therefore, what is the halacha? Says Beis Hillel, he has to be a Nazir, for 2 terms. Says the Gemara on the bottom of Chaf Amud Aleph, Mas Nisan Deloikai Tana. The Mishnah is not working with the following Tanya. The Tanya is learned in a Brisa. Rabbi Yishmael ben Aishav Yochanan ben Broika Imer. They never argued on such a case of what Achas Omer Shtayim, Achas Omer Chamish, Sheish B'chal Chamish Shtayim. That case, the case that we thought is our Mishnah, says Rabbi Yishmael ben Aishav Yochanan ben Broika, is not a debate. Everyone agrees that included in 5 is 2, and therefore what? You'd have to be a Nazir for 2 terms. Alma nechliku, what is the debate? Al kat achas, when it's one group. It's not 2 groups clashing, says Rabbi Shmuel ben Aisham Rechem Breika. Because if it's 2 groups clashing, each group has a validity unto themselves. And if each group has a validity, you have a group that says 2, a group that says 5, included in 5 is 2, and certainly the person has to be a Nazir for 2 terms. When is the machlokes, says Rabbi Shmuel ben Aisham Rechem Breika? When it's singular edim. 1 8 says 2 and 1 8 says 5. Then Shebei Shamei Oimrim, 8 lines on the bottom, Chafam and Aleph, first one line is Nechliku Eduson. Says Bei Shammai, the Edus is split. One says 2, one says 5. They can't come to terms. Boom, they have nothing to do with each other. That's why there's no Edus at all. Beis Oimrim still Chamish Bechlal Chamish Tayim. So says the Gemara, our Mishnah is clearly not like Rabbi Shmuel ben Aisham ben Breika, because he holds that there's no machlokes in the case of our Mishnah. He holds in the case of our Mishnah, when it's 2 groups of Eidim, everyone agrees that there is an Nazirus of 2 terms. Amar Rav, and Rav continues and explains, I call Moedim b'moina, says Rav, everyone as well agrees when they counted their Eidos. Amar le Rav Chamel, Rav Chisda, Maika Amar, what do you mean that they counted? What do you mean by counted? Do you mean that one says it was 2 and not 5, one says it's 5 and not 2? That makes no sense. Of course there's a machlokes in that case, they're contradicting each other. Elo, echad omer achas, ushtayim, ve'echad omer shalosh arba chamesh. One witness says 1 and 2. The next witness says 3, 4, and 5. In this case, says Rav Chama to Rav Chisda, as we turn over to Chaf Amud Beis, in this case, there is no machlokes. Says Rav Chama to Rav Chisda, in such a scenario, everyone agrees that we would split the Eidos, and there would be no Nazirus at all. Meaning, Rabbi Shmuel ben Aisham ben Breika said a case where everyone agrees with the certainly yes in Eidos. What case was that? 2 groups of Eidim, one says 5, one says 2, then everyone agrees is certainly 2. But now, says Rav Chama, to Rav Chisda, everyone also agrees if there's singular Eidim counting that there's no Eidos. Says Rav Chama, I disagree. Halama li. But why should he say 1 and 2? Hashta yish laimar chamirta. Amar Rav. It's a gear way says Amar Rav. Here could it be that he could have said something larger? There's nothing else he could have said. Kilsa loy Amar. Certainly he's including the smaller number, and that's why the other person didn't say it. Meaning, when the guy counts 3, 4, 5, he obviously means to include 1 and 2. So how can you tell me there's no combination over here? Of course there is. So says the Gemara, Amri b'marava ein hachasha b'moina. They said in the West and Eretz Yisrael, there's no contradiction, the exact opposite. That when they're counting, when one says 1 and 2, and the second one says 3, 4, and 5, they're not contradicting, and the opposite. Everyone agrees that in this case, what would happen? That there would be yes, and Eidos will have to keep at least 2 terms. Hadron aloch misha, we should do a fabulous chazara of this 3rd parak of Nazirus. And with that, we continue right away into the 4th parak of Nazirus. We're just going to read the Mishnah, and in the next year we'll pick up from the Gemara. Says the Mishnah, says the Mishnah, Misha marini Nazir, the shofli sound familiar. Visha machavira, and its friend hears. Vamar vani. And he says, and I, Vani. And another friend says, and I as well. What's the halacha? Kulam Nazirim. They are all Nazirim. But says the Mishnah, Hutar Harishan. What happens if the first one is released? If the first one is annulled? Hotru Kulan. It's dominoes. Each one is making a Nazirus depending on the first one. So if the first guy says Harini Nazir, and then Shimon says an I, and Levi says an I, and Yehuda says an I. So if Reuven undoes his Naziros, what happens? And there's no Shimon, there's no Levi, there's no Yehuda, because everyone made themselves dependent on the previous one. But Hutar Achrein, let's say the last guy, let's say Yehuda undid his Naziros, Achrein Mutter, he has no Naziros, but the Kulan Asur, and they're all Asur. Case number 1 in the Mishnah. Case number 2 in the Mishnah. Amar Harini Nazir, one says I'm a Nazir. Shama Chaveira, and the friend hears V'amar Pi Kipith. My mouth is like his mouth. Sa'ari, my hair, Kisa'arai is like his hair. What's the halacha? Hareze Nazir. That's a form of taking on Nazirs as well. Says the Mishnah, a third case. Harini Nazir, someone says I'm a Nazir. V'shama ishtoi v'amar v'ani. V'shama ishtoi v'amra v'ani. His wife here says, I'm as well a Nazir. What's the halacha? Mefer eshelah v'shaloi kayim. The husband, the one that originally initiated the story, he is able to do what? He's able to annul his wife's, as every husband has the power to annul his wife's neder. So he can annul his wife's neder, Nazirus, and his personal Nazirus will still stand. But what happens if she says Harini Nazira, Veshama Ba'ila, and the husband hears V'amar V'ani, and he says an I as well, then Eino Yochalaf, he can annul his wife's vow, and we can understand, because by him saying it's upon me as well, it's a form of being Mekayim, therefore he can annul the Naziris afterwards. V'hareini Nazir Va'at, and the Mishnah concludes, if someone says, I am a Nazir and you, V'amra, and she responds, Amen, yes, I am a Nazir. Still, Mefer Eshelah, V'shaloi Kayim. He's still able to undo his wife's neder, because the husband has the ability to undo the Naziris and the dharma of his wife. But, Hareini Nazira, says the Mishnah, what if she says, I'm a Nazir, Ve'ata, and she says to her husband, and you, meaning as a question, similar in the other case it was, he said, I'm a Nazir, and you? And she says, yeah. He still could undo it. But if she says I'm a Nazir and she says Va'ata and he says V'amar Amen, again, Inu Yachal Hafer, by him agreeing to what his wife says, that itself is a form of Kiyam, and therefore he cannot annul his wife vow. We'll pick up from the Gemara in the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.